everybody, today we are making a hoodie with pockets. This is the McCalls 6614 pattern and we are doing a View C, but all in one colour. So if you want to see how you can make your own fabulous hoodie, please stay tuned. So let's get started. I have here my front piece, which I cut on the fold, and I've got all my pattern pieces with me because on the front piece, we had to mark these marks here. This is where my pockets are going to go, which is the first thing that we're going to do. So I've also got my pocket pieces here. I don't really need that bit. And then this is the side front. So this is what the other side will be joined to. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to open this out. Now there's a couple of ways you can mark this. For me, the easiest way is to just lay this here and then grab a pocket piece and lie it where it needs to go to, like that, and then you can just pull that bit out. So you never start all the way from the edge of here. So we're going to start in the seam allowance amount. And so we're going to start here. We're going to stitch and back stitch to lock it in. And then we're going to stitch down and stop where the other mark would be. Now, because I've made so many clothing patterns, I can visually see that. But if you are super new to sewing, what you can do is take this pocket piece and then lay the side piece with the two notches, and you can actually mark those two notches onto your pocket piece. So I'll do it for the next one. So we just line this up. So we're going to put it there and there. Now this is a friction pen, which means it will erase, so I can just scribble it on. So now I've got the two marks where I need to start and stop. So I'm going to take this piece and my pattern piece. So I'm going to flip it over so it can line up along the edges. And then I am just going to mark that along the edge like so, and then pull this out. Now, if you want to, you could pin that so that it won't move. This fabric's not very slippery, so I'm not super worried about pinning it. So I'm just going to start here, stitch and back stitch, up to the top, stitch and back stitch. We always back stitch because it's locking in those stitches so they won't come out later. And then I'm going to come back and trim off all the tails because I just don't really want them hanging around. So that is now the pocket pieces on our front. So it should look like this with like some little wing things. So I'm going to pop that aside and I'm going to come and do the same for my side piece. Or my side pieces, I should say. So you should have two of these. So again, I've got the markings on here so that I know where to line up my pocket piece. And again, if you want to, you can just grab this, lay it along, because it's the same, and then grab your friction texter, or chalk. You could use a chalk, pen or pencil or a pin even if you wanted to. I just find this way easier. And then again on this one, I actually normally wouldn't measure this because I can eyeball the seam allowance pretty well, but this is a teaching video, so I should teach you the correct way. As you become more and more confident, you won't need to mark it. You'll just be able to eyeball it like me. We shouldn't have put that away because we still need to line these up. So I'm going to line it up with the bottom edge like this and then just drag that down until those notches meet. And that will now line up with the other side pocket. So I'm going to flip it around so that the bulk of my fabric is not in the throat of my machine. It would fit fine for my machine, but if you're using a domestic, your throat's obviously a lot smaller. And it's good to have it, to try and have it always out. Also, what haven't I told you? Oh, so I'm using Rasant thread today. And in, I don't know, a blue colour. I went with dark blue because I don't have any of this particular colour and I forgot to buy it when I was at Spotlight. And Spotlight is like an hour drive for me, so we're just not going to have it today. And so then again, lining it up, there to there, pull this out, pop it back in the tub, and then stitch and back stitch. Now, if you have an overlocker, you're going to want to overlock this little section now because you won't be able to get to it later. If you don't have an overlocker and you're on a domestic, you can zigzag or use an overlocking stitch for the edge. And if you have none of those, you can grab some pinking shears or zigzag scissors and cut the seam. So I'm going to overlock this section. So I'm going to hit pause. I will show you the overlocker later when we're going to do a lot more. But for now, I'll just quickly overlock this and I'll be right back. That is now overlocked, but just in that section. So now we have our pockets. So we're going to bring back our main front centerpiece and lay it out flat. And then we want to take our side pieces and lay them right sides together. So the taller side is going up here. And this little kind of notchy part here is our seam. So we just want to line that up. Now, again, if you're new, grab some pins and always put them in across. You're less likely to run over them. And even if you do run over them, it won't break your machine. Right? So you'd want to pin all the way down. And then we're going to get to here and we're going to line up that pocket. Put a pin there. And then we're going to line up the pocket so that it perfectly matches. And you can put some pins all the way around that if you want to. I'm just going to put in a few. And then line up the bottom so it also matches. Put a pin there. So now what we want to do is we're going to sew down. We're going to get to our stitching and then go around the pocket. And then back down that last little bit of the jumper. Or hoodie, or whatever you want to call it. Sweater? I suppose it depends on where you live as to what you call it. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to stitch and back stitch. Take the pin out. So we're coming down to our former stitching. You want to get right on top of the stitching of the pocket, and then we're going to swivel out and go around the pocket like so. And again, we want to make sure that in here is lined up as well. And I'm going to push that seam allowance so it's facing the pocket, and then I'm just going to stitch the last little bit. You also notice every time I turned a corner, I made sure my needle was down so that I don't lose my spot. And then we can come back up the top and trim off the seam. So now we've got a side front, so this will sit here, and then with a little pocket here, like that. So now let's do the other side. So this side I'm not going to pin. I always like to go from top to bottom. That's just my personal thing I do. But you can, if you want to be able to see this piece, you can stitch from bottom to top. Just put some pins in and off you go. So I'm going to stitch and back stitch. And then I'm going to come to here and I'm going to hold the pockets perfectly together. So I'm using my fingers as pins. And then line that up. And down I go until I get right to my pocket, and then I will come and line up the pocket, twist, and around we go. So I'm using my hand as like a giant pin. I'm always stopping with my needle down. And so now I'm just going to line up the last little bit. So I'm going to line up the end and hold that with one hand. And then I'm going to use my other hand to line up here, and I'm going to push the seam allowance over so it's facing the same way as the top. Needle down, pivot, down to the end, and backstitch. I recently changed my plate here, so it now has markings, and it has definitely helped a lot. So this is what you should now have. 2 fun pockets on the front panel. Right. Now we need to overlock this. So I'm going to reset up the camera next to my overlocker so that you guys can come and watch what we're going to do. This is my industrial overlocker. As you can hear, I do not have a servo motor on it. I've just got a rotary motor. But since I very rarely record with it, I'm okay with it. So I'm going to start at an edge, and we're just going to lift up the foot and then place it in. So if you've never seen an overlocker before, this piece here actually chops off any excess fabric. So we just want to chop off a little bit so that it's all going to be even, and then you always want to leave a tail. So it's going to chop. This bit here is chopping, and then it's stitching. So this is set up for 3-thread overlocking. And as you can see, it's now sealing my edge beautifully. And it looks like my child has not played with my tension, which is a nice change. He likes to fiddle with the dials, which is super annoying, because then he changes the tension. I have to come back and fix it. So we're just going around. Now you can't needle down and pivot on an overlocker, so you just kind of have to do the best you can. So now that I'm getting close to this corner, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull this and stretch it so it's straight. I'm not going to pull hard, but I'm just going to swivel it around so that it's not going to chop off any excess, but it's still going to seal off that edge. And so it has been overlocked. Then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm again going to start from the top. I always have this hand underneath like this to make sure that nothing's creeping up, because once you cut a hole in the main panel, you have to basically do another one or come up with a creative way to hide the hole. So my hand under here is making sure that all the fabric is smooth coming up to the cutter and the needle. And then this one's just kind of helping guide it. And so then again, we're going to go around the pocket. And I'm using my hand to push down and kind of help guide it around. And then I'm going to get to here. And I'm going to bend it back. Like so. And then trim off the tails. And so then it is now overlocked and can be machine washed, which is what I love. So let's go back and sew the rest. I won't come and show you any more of the overlocking because I think I've covered everything you need to know about it. You can't needle and pivot, so you just get close and then bring it out. So now we're going to do pretty much the same thing to the back pieces, except without the pockets. So it should be quicker and easier for you. So this is my back. So you have to cut the back on a fold. So I'm just going to pop those aside. And so again, I always like to start from the top. I'm going to separate these. So you always have right sides together. And I'm just going to pop this under, line it up, and then once I've got a decent bit done, I come and line up the bottom, and I'm not pulling on it, but I'm just making sure that everything's lining up. The last thing you want to do is pull on it and stretch it out of shape. So we're going to backstitch, trim off the tail, and at the top. If you do all your tails as you remember, it's just easier. You don't have to go and do it all at the end and have a bunch of tails everywhere. For those that are going to ask, the top that I'm wearing is a Butterick pattern, which is by Gertie. And I didn't do a video because I'm not sure if Gertie allows it, because she has like her own channel and stuff. But I do have different shirts I plan on doing. So stay tuned. I've got a bunch of them cut out actually. And backstitch at the end. I'm also going to do a capelet, I've decided. Okay, so that's the back done. And so now they want us to do the sleeve. So I try and move back and forth from the overlocker as few times as possible. So that's the hood. So I'm going to stitch this, and then once I've stitched the sleeve, I will go and overlock the sleeve and the back. And if I wasn't recording this, I probably would have done the front, the back, and the sleeves as individuals and then sew them. Basically, you can stitch it so long as there's nothing that's going to overlap your overlocking. So I could have done all of these pieces individually and then overlock at the end. So the first thing we want to do is join the split at the top, because that is going to close up our sleeve. Pop it in, stitch, back stitch, off we go. Grab the other one. We can chain stitch this if you like. I'm a big fan of chain stitching. When I'm not recording, I do everything kind of out of order so that I can just chain stitch as much as possible. I'll pop this one in, back stitch. Once you've done a few stitches, you can actually trim this one off if it's in your way. Stitch, back stitch, pull it out, trim. And then there was no excess stitching at the top. So now your sleeve should look like this. So it's got a bit of a curvy part here. Now if you're doing the sleeve that's got the lace down it, now's the time that you put your lace. You just put it in the center. But we're obviously not doing that. So we're going to, you know what? Actually, I'm going to overlock this, and the back piece, and then we're going to join them all together. So everything's overlocked. So I'm going to lay my back piece down, because that's the one I just had. You could use your front as well. And then we're going to take our sleeve, and we're going to pin the back to the back. Which one's this? Front or back? No, I think I had it right the first time. I did. Right. This to there. So if you want to, you can pin. I might actually use Wonder Clips because this is a Ponte double knit and apparently it doesn't like to be pinned today. Lucky me. Pin the top. So you can use clips instead of pins. It tends to only work with non-slippery fabrics though. So line all that up. So we're going to pin that one to there. And then we can come and pin the other sleeve to here. So you want to line up the top and the bottom. And it should all fit fantastically well. If it's not, if you've got like less than this much overhanging, I personally, if you're new to sewing, I just leave it. I don't think it's going to affect you as much as you think. This is a stretchy jumper. So if you miss by this much in one section, I know it's not what you should do. So I'm not suggesting that this is what you do. But if you've sewn it and you can't figure out why you've got a little bit extra, I would just ignore it. So better to be finished than perfect. If you're always striving for perfection, which is a good thing to do, but if you're going to just keep pulling it out, you'll never get it finished. So I'm going to stitch and back stitch, and then stitch along here, and then stitch up and back stitch. Trim off those tails, and then we're going to do the other side. Now, if I wasn't recording, I probably would have just scrunched this up and stitched them both as a chain stitch. But I feel like that's potentially looking too difficult on camera. You also want to make sure that you're not holding it back and stretching it out of shape too. Stretchy fabrics are a bit tricky like that. So if you're pulling on this, you would actually sew it stretchy and then you'll get like this weird thing happening. So that now has our sleeves. So we want to take our front and we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to lay the front down sideways, by the way. This is the neck here. And then I'm going to grab the sleeve and lay it on top like this at the sleeve. And then clip it in place. And again, we're not trying to pull. See how that's got like quite a lot of stretch? That's always why I recommend doing the top and the bottom first. Because now that just has to fit in there, which is much more manageable. I do the same thing with bag making. Start at the ends, work your way in, or start at the center and work your way out. That way, nothing is stretched more one side than the other. So we can stitch this. You notice I haven't done overlocking yet because none of the seams have crossed over. But I imagine the next ones are going to. So we're going to do this and then probably have to overlock because we want to sew our sleeve shut, and that would go over here. So grab our other sleeve. We're going to do the same thing again. So that it should just be like a giant neck hole is pretty much what we're making. So again, come up to the top, line up the top. Lay that flat. I'm also pointing that seam towards the bottom. It's just a habit that I have. So, starting here, we're going to stitch and back stitch. And that just caught my tail. Trim it off. See, I missed one. No matter how much I try, I always manage to miss a seam when I'm talking to myself. Well, to you guys, but currently it's to myself. Back stitch, pull it out. So now you should just have a neck hole with all this kind of dangly fabric. So I am going to hit pause and I'm going to go and overlock all of those shoulder seams, or like arm attachment sleeves that we just did. So that is now all overlocked. So there should be no raw edges on anything that you've stitched. Again, if you don't have an overlocker, zigzag scissors or zigzag stitch, or if you've got an overlocking stitch. So we're going to pop that aside and do the hood. We're nearly finished, by the way. We don't have much to go. So we're going to take the hood and just switch it so it's right sides together. And then we're going to stitch. We're not going to stitch the straight edge because that's where your face goes. So we're just going to stitch the curviest part, which will be joining the hood together. Now, because this is a curve, I am going to stick some clips on here because I have a feeling it might try and stretch out of place. Curves and knits can be tricky, so I'm just going to prevent that problem and add some wonder clips. So again, we're going to stitch and then back stitch. And around and then back stitch. Haha, I've got 2 sets of snips at the moment. Excellent. So then we're going to overlock this. And then it says you can actually top stitch the hood. So another option if you wanted to is zigzag stitch this and then top stitch down each side. But I'm going to overlock it first because I am all about the overlocking. And then I'm also going to overlock the front like hood opening edge. So I'm going to overlock the curve and the whole opening so I don't have to go back later. I am not lining my hood, but if you were lining your hood, you actually wouldn't need to do this bit because you would join them together. However, I am not doing that. So I'm just going to fold it over and stitch it down like that so that there's no raw edge there, but there will be some stitching. I could also just cut another hood piece and have it lined, but maybe I do want it lined. Okay, so let's line it. So I've already overlocked this way, so we're going to top stitch that down. Now, we want to make sure that our seam allowance is under where we're stitching, but that we're not pulling too hard. And then I'm going to get another hood and we're going to do it in the opposite direction. Because I do have a lot of this fabric left over. So I figured, why not line the hood? You could also line the hood with something fluffy or something completely different. Or if I had like a solid pink, that would look lovely so that the hood's like a fun colour on the inside. You wouldn't have to line it with itself. So I'm just going to backstitch to there. And then I think I will go and find something to line the hood with. And if I've got nothing exciting, I will just do another one. So I'll be right back. I have cut a second hood out of the same fabric. I didn't overlock that front bit because we're going to join it later anyway. But if you do have like a fabric that's nice on the inside, you could just turn that over the seam allowance amount, which is 5/8 of an inch, and then top stitch it down. That would also work. So I am now going to lay this one here. So what we're going to do is we're going to stitch, top stitch on the opposite side to what we just did before. And what that's going to do is put our seam allowances in the opposite direction. So that's the base. So I want to flip it to this side and do it here. Now, obviously I started at the top on the last one. And I'm just kind of pulling this apart gently, but I'm not stretching it. And I am stitching 1/8 of an inch from the seam. Now the curved bit gets a little bit tricky, so you kind of want to gather it up and then just do it in smaller sections. You can pin this if you're worried. But this one should be okay not to pin. And then we're going to back stitch at the end just to seal off that. Awesome. So now we have two hoods. So we're going to put them right sides together. And we're going to line up that seam in the center because that will be noticed. That will be like front and center on you. So you want to make sure that that bit joins correctly. So I'm going to put two clips in it to hold it like that. And then we'll come down to the corner and put a clip there. Or a pin if you're using pins. Most people making clothes use pins. I just can't pin this today quickly. So you can put as many or as few pins in as you like. Actually, I'm going to stop because I'm not going to really need them. So I'm going to line it up at the edge. And we're going to stitch and back stitch like we always do. And then stitch around completely from one edge to the other. Now, when I get to here, I want to make sure that that seam stays tucked where I want it. And then I'm going to come to here and I'm going to manually just join it like that. And then I kind of grab it here so I can fold it over and then use this hand to help guide the rest of it. And that's how I get away with no pins most of the time. I own pins because there is a time and a place for everything. Okay. Now technically that seam is actually going to be hidden, so I don't have to overlock it if I don't want to. It's just a habit that I have. I like overlocking everything. But that is my front center seam. It's like schmicko. And yes, I use the word schmicko. Now, if you don't want to, you don't have to top stitch this. This should just sit all nice and lovely. But we are going to baste the bottom by the look of it. So basting, I usually do it at about 1/8 of an inch. It's just to join the two pieces of fabric together so it becomes one. Because once it's one, it's easy to work with. I'm still going to backstitch because I can't help myself. And then the middle center back should also match up. And then I'm going to fold that over. So we are going to overlock this bit later. So you notice I didn't overlock the inside because now I've decided I'm lining it. You don't have to. You still can if you'd like to. There would be no harm in overlocking it, but I skipped it because it's now all enclosed in there. So we're not going to see that seam. And I don't think this stuff will really fray and carry on anyway. So now we have a hood. We're going to attach the hood. So we're going to come and grab our glorious piece of this. And you're going to find your front. Now, this is easy enough because we put pockets in. So we're just going to find the piece with pockets, which is here. So this is now our front. So I'm going to find front and center by joining the seam to seam like this, coming out, and I'm just going to do a little clip. So that is now front center. I also want to find back center, so I'm going to do the same thing over here, like that. So it's just a really little clip that kind of gives me this little divot bit here, just so I can tell. So I'm going to take the hood. Now, if you've got a side that you want out as a preference, the outside needs to touch the right side of your fabric here. So this is the back center here. So I'm going to match that up with the back center of the actual garment. And put a clip. And then we're just going to clip all the way around. So I'm going to kind of go 3 clips to hold it in place. And then we can just work our way around. Now the front is meant to overlap a little bit. So that's what we're going to do. But it's also why we found the front, because they're not going to match up. They overlap just a little bit. Does it say how much? It doesn't say how much. So I'm just going to keep clipping around. So there's my center, and there's my excess. This is not too bad. I ended up with just over 1 inch. So then we're going to come from the other side. And we're going to do the same thing. So from back center, we're going to clip it all into place. If you were doing a neckband, it actually probably would have been way quicker, but hoodies are cooler, so. Okay, so now I'm just going to add this into the clips because we're overlapping, and you should have the same amount past the center point so that you know that it has been centered. But I've now just got a little bit of overlap here. What does the pattern want us to do now? Done that. Baste with right sides together, pin hood to neck. We did that. Okay, so we're going to stitch this, overlock it, and then top stitch it. We can do that. So I'm going to push the hood inside our circle like this so that it's easy to stitch. And then I'm just going to start anywhere and I'm going to stitch it down. I'm using the seam allowance the pattern suggests, which all clothing patterns have a 5/8 or 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, 15 mil. Unfortunately, I've never seen one of these plates with centimeter markings. That's why everything's done in inches. I also need to keep an eye on my bobbin thread because I have a sneaking suspicion I don't have enough to finish this project. So I'm back to the start, so I've backstitched. And now again, I'm going to have to stop the video so that I can overlock that neckline. But from the outside, we now have a hoodie. See, look at that. Haha, we're nearly done. All right. Actually, I can probably overlock that later. I will overlock that later. Let's just move on. Oh no, because it wants us to top stitch it down. I have to overlock it. Now that that's overlocked, I've turned it right side out, and I'm actually going to do the opposite to what I normally tell you, and I'm going to put the jacket part into the throat so that I can push the seam towards the bottom or away from the hood, and then we're going to top stitch at 1/8 of an inch all the way around the hood, and that's going to hold that seam down. Now this is a curve, so you're going to want to go slowly and adjust everything as you go. I'm sticking my hand into the hood to make sure that the seam allowance is under where I'm stitching, because otherwise it's a little bit pointless. We want to be stitching that seam allowance down. And we're just circling this around and around. Now you could skip this step, but I wouldn't recommend it. Now that I'm back to the start, I'm going to backstitch, trim off those tails on both sides, like that. Voila! Hood is now stitched down. We're on to the next page. Easy enough. So we're just going to stitch everything shut. Is the idea now. So this bit is going over to this bit. So the hood's in the middle, and we're going to put front to back and then sew the sleeves shut. So like this, so that it looks more like a t-shirt or a jumper, which is what we're trying to make, not a t-shirt. That was silly. So we put front to back, or you can start at the sleeves if that makes more sense to you. So fold the sleeves over to close them up like this, and then I'm going to come and I'm going to join the sleeve seams, and I'm pushing the seam allowance towards the bottom of the jumper like that. So I'm going to start at the sleeve because that's going to help me push the seam allowance down to where I want. So we're going to start here, and we're going to stitch and back stitch like we always do. And I'm just going to bring the weight so that I'm not pulling on the fabric. So I bring the weight up to where I need it. And then here is the join, so the underarm join. So I'm making sure that they are pointing towards the bottom, which is why I started at the sleeve. We're stitching down and back stitching. So like that. And then we're going to come and do the same to the other side. So again, I'm going to want to start at the sleeve so that the seam allowance at the underarm section will be pointing towards the bottom. It's harder to do if you're going in the opposite direction because it wants to be pushed the other way. So I'm just going to pop in the 3 clips like this. Again, if you're new to this, don't think you have to only do 3 clips. I probably wouldn't recommend trying it. For the sake of time, it's not worth not clipping things sometimes. So again, I'm now bringing the weight of the jumper onto the table. And then I'm at the underarm hole, so I'm going to stop with my needle down and then come to the bottom and line that up. And then backstitch. And so then we need to overlock or zigzag those seams. But we do now, we are nearly finished. So if you turn it in the right way, you now got what looks like a hoodie. We just need to add the arm cuffs and we need to hem the bottom. But it does almost look like a hoodie. So I am going to overlock that. But before I do, I'm going to grab my sleeve cuffs. Now, I didn't use a ribbing. I've just used the same fabric because that's what I wanted. So what I want to do is I'm going to stitch short sides together. And then again with this one, so the shorter sides together. And then I can overlock those seams as well before I stitch them on. So that's one less thing I have to turn the camera off for. So I'm going to overlock both of these and both of the side seams. All right, so let's make the cuffs. So I am going to turn it so it's half in the right way, like this. And what this is doing is creating no seam at the edge cuff. So we're just putting the edges together like this, but you want to make sure that your seam allowance is on the same side so that there's no twists and it will sit flatter like this. And then I am going to baste this to make it easier. So I'm just going to stitch all the way along the edge. Now you can make this out of ribbing if you want that different color on the end. Or if you've done, you could do it as the same fabric that you did for the inside of your hood if you wanted it to match like that. I didn't have any other cool colors. I don't have a lot of stretchy fabrics here, so that was no good for me. So now I've got a cuff that sits like this. Now these cuffs are going to be a little bit tighter than if I did ribbing, but my hand still fits in it and it sits on my wrist. So that's all I really care about. As long as it's going to fit me, since it's for me. They also didn't have any ribbing at Spotlight that matched this well. The colours were all off when I bought it. Nothing goes better with itself than itself, as a general rule. So we're always going to stop with our needle down and just lining up that edge, we're going to baste it. This is just going to make it easier to work with in a second. Because now we're going to put it into our sleeves. So I'm going to line up this seam with the seam of the cuff. So I can just shove that in like so. Line that up, clip it down. And then line up the opposite side and stretch it so that it reaches the other side. Like that. And like that. So that now sits in there. So I'm going to do the same to this one so that I can stitch them both at the same time. So I am taking that seam. Now if you wanted your cuffs a bit bigger, you can just do a smaller seam allowance and that will in turn make them a bigger. So clip and clip, and then opposite side, oops, like that. And you know what, I could probably get away with just putting the 2 clips, but I did do 4 clips on the other one to show you. So we're going to start here at the seam. I want to start at the seam. And then I am just going to stretch these out so that they're even. That's pretty much all I'm doing. This is one of those few times where it doesn't matter if I'm stretching it because I'm trying to make everything fit evenly. Oh, that was close. I just ran out of bobbin thread right then. Love it. And then we are going to have to overlock that. And then it suggests that we do a roll hem for the bottom. So we're going to do that too, because it's always it's always fun to play with a roll hem. I quite like it. But first we need a bobbin. So as with all my bobbins, I am going to oil up my bobbin case. I have done a separate video on where to put the bobbin for this for your industrial machine. Domestics don't need it. Nowhere on a domestic I think that you can reach that actually requires oil. It's all kind of more up in here that domestics need it. Right. So now I'm just going to take my little bottle of oil. I like it because it's convenient and it's easy to deposit the oil right where I need it. You only want to put a little bit. If you put too much, it will actually get on your project. If you accidentally put too much, just run a scrap piece of fabric under it and it'll prevent that. I don't need this full. These bobbins hold quite a lot of normal sewing thread. So that will be enough to finish this project and probably do another whole one. So I am going to, I'm going to untwist it. It's all twisty. I'm just going to tie it onto the old one. Now I don't do this with domestics. I rethread domestics. But this one, it's just quicker to do that. And I waste less than half a meter of thread. But I save myself, 5 minutes. Probably not 5, but definitely some. Then I just have to re-thread the bits that move. So I always unthread anything that's going to potentially knot, which is why I take the thread completely out of the needle. And I don't know what the bar's called, but there's a bar that goes up and down that helps you sew, obviously. I take the thread out of there because I don't want it to knot up there, because then I've got to sit and unknot it, which is also not productive. So again, we're going to grab the other one. I'm going to come into where the join is. We're going to join. And then I'm going to slightly stretch and stitch around. I don't know if you can tell, but my machine is definitely more quieter now that I've put the oil in. It's already had some oil today, but it's also been making things today, so... Okay, I can overlock that bit later as well. So now what I'm going to do is change my foot over to a roll hem foot. Now you don't have to have a roll hem foot to do a roll hem. You can iron it or fold it into place. I personally just find it quicker. And I've got the foot, so why not use it? Otherwise it was a waste of money. But basically what a roll hem foot is doing is, I will show you. I always like to start at a seam. What the roll hem foot is going to do is it's going to fold it over and then over a second time to hide all of that raw edge. So I didn't need to overlock this. If I did overlock it, I could, if I want to, just turn it off the once and then stitch it down. But this is what it tells me to do, so let's do this. So I'm going to start at a seam. I always start at a seam. I'm going to fold it over and then stitch and back stitch. And then we're going to do a couple of stitches and then lift up the fabric so it goes into the foot. And then we're just going to slowly go around. Now you want to try really, really hard not to stretch your fabric while you're doing this, or it'll go a bit kind of wonky. So you just want to pretty much just let it do its own thing. seams are always a little bit trickier because they are bulkier. So sometimes you just kind of have to give them a little bit of a tug to help them get through. But they do get through it in the end. There's lots of seams in this, lots of the side seams, all the base seams. So it really needs some help to get through those bits. But the rest of it, it goes quite smoothly. Another seam, but we're nearly finished. So you can do this by hand. Right, so that, I'm going to pull this out because that particular seam just got stuck in the foot because it's a bit thick. You can also trim them off. I usually do trim them off. I just forgot this time. So I'm just going to fold that under. This bit here is the problem. So because it's going to be hidden anyway, I can actually just trim off a little bit of that bulk in the section that's going to be turned. And now it won't be so bulky. So I'm just going to start right on that particular seam and then backstitch. And then we can just do the last little bit. So again, we're coming up to the next seam, which went a lot easier because I chopped that bulk out. And then back to the last one. Come on. There we go, and backstitch. So now I just need to go and trim off all of those tails that we created. And turn your hoodie inside out. And it is done. I just need to overlock there, but I'll do that in a second. I like it. I think it looks fabulous. There you go. One hoodie. Alright guys, I am off until the next video. Bye-bye.